like to think that you have that kind of courage too, darling.
What are you trying to tell me?
That when a man goes off to war, we have to be.
The golden age of Hollywood wasn't just glamorous. It was tightly controlled. Stars were owned by studios. Every public appearance was scripted. Every romance was polished for the press. Contracts often included morality clauses, which meant a whisper of queerness could destroy a career overnight. These women, fierce, talented, unforgettable, loved differently in a time that didn't allow it. They forged secret relationships behind closed doors. Some used gal pals and roommates to describe lifelong partners. Others burned letters, deleted history, or signed fake marriages just to protect themselves. But their truth didn't vanish. It waited in diaries, in rumors, in stolen glances during interviews. And today, we can finally start to piece it back together, not for scandal, but for history. Because these aren't just hidden love stories. They're acts of survival, quiet courage in an era that punished honesty. Let's begin with a woman whose mystery became her legacy. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo, the woman who wanted to be alone. Greta Garbo didn't just avoid the spotlight. She practically vanished into it. Her quote, "I want to be alone," became the most iconic line in Hollywood, but few asked why. In truth, Garbo lived a deeply private, deeply coded life. And at the center of it, a love she could never speak aloud. Garbo never married. Her romantic life was a question mark, full of whispers and contradictions. But one name appears again and again: Mercedes de Acosta. A writer, a poet, and openly lesbian, Mercedes and Garbo exchanged hundreds of letters over the years. Passionate, intimate, and often desperate in tone, they reveal a connection far deeper than friendship. In one letter, Garbo wrote simply, "I dream of seeing you." Another, "You mean too much." Biographers believe they were on again, off again for decades. Their relationship wasn't always easy. Garbo's fear of exposure made commitment impossible, but the emotional weight of it is undeniable. Mercedes wasn't the only woman linked to Garbo. Actresses like Lilian Tashman and Salka Viertel were also close companions, but none had the lasting pull of Mercedes. Garbo's silence became her shield. Her queerness was never confirmed in life, but in death, the pieces emerged, quietly, delicately, like her. And from mystery to magnificence, we move to another woman who didn't keep her love for women quite so quiet. Marlene Dietrich, Hollywood's bold, androgynous siren. If Greta Garbo hid behind a veil of solitude, Marlene Dietrich kicked down the doors in heels and a tuxedo. Bold, unapologetic, and decades ahead of her time, Dietrich lived her truth in private, even as the cameras tried to force another narrative. Off-screen, she was magnetic. Her affairs were legendary, both with men and women. She shared passionate relationships with Greta Garbo, Edith Piaf, and again, Mercedes de Acosta. There were also rumors of flings with Claudette Colbert and other leading ladies. Dietrich wore men's suits in public long before it was acceptable. She smoked cigars, danced with women, and made no apologies. Her fashion was political. Her sexuality was fluid and fiercely her own. In Hollywood, this terrified the studios, so they cleaned her up for the cameras. Glamorous dresses, romantic storylines, always playing the temptress, never the truth. But behind the scenes, she partied with the queer elite, including writer Dorothy Arzner and Nasimova. She never declared her identity, but she never denied it either. "I love who I love," she once said, "and I never ask permission." Dietrich's life wasn't perfect. Her affairs were messy. She hurt people, and she was hurt in return. But her boldness paved the way for women who didn't want to hide anymore. And next, we look at a star who played the doting wife on screen, but whose real emotional life told a different story. Barbara Stanwyck, America's sweetheart, with a secret. Barbara Stanwyck built her career playing sharp, self-reliant women. On screen, she oozed strength, whether pulling off an insurance scam in Double Indemnity or raising a child alone in Stella Dallas. But off-screen, she was carrying a secret Hollywood wasn't ready for. She was married once to actor Robert Taylor, but even that marriage, many believe, was arranged by the studio to squash rumors. The two were often seen together in press photos, but lived mostly separate lives. Insiders called it an MGM cover-up. What makes Stanwyck's story more revealing are her long, close friendships with women like costume designer Edith Head and actress Jane Withers. She took vacations with women. She hosted all-female gatherings. She never remarried. And most of all, she guarded her privacy with almost obsessive care. A former confidant once said, "Barbara didn't deny anything. She just refused to explain." Some called her cold. Others said she was simply protecting herself in a world that couldn't offer her safety. Her films reflected her reality, complicated, layered, and often about women who had to survive on their own terms. Stanwyck was never out, but her life whispered a truth that still echoes today. And from whispers to wild declarations, our next woman never wanted to be subtle. She wanted to set fire to every rule in the book. Tallulah Bankhead, the wild rebel of stage and screen. If there was a rule in Hollywood, Tallulah Bankhead probably broke it. Loud, outrageous, and completely unapologetic, she brought chaos wherever she went. But behind the wild one-liners and scandalous interviews was a woman who loved who she wanted, when she wanted, and didn't care who found out. Tallulah was known for her wit. She once said, "My father warned me about men and booze, but he never said anything about women and cocaine." And that was Tallulah, always half joke, half truth. She had relationships with both men and women, but it was her rumored romances with Billie Holiday and Hattie McDaniel that sent shockwaves through conservative circles. In a time when interracial or same-sex love could ruin a career, Tallulah just leaned in harder. Hollywood didn't know what to do with her. She refused to play the studio game. Her career suffered, but her legend only grew. She once joked, "I'm as pure as the driven slush." Even as her fame faded, her name remained electric. She had no interest in hiding, no use for closets. And in a world of secrets, that made her the boldest rebel of all. Joan Crawford, Scandals, Secrets, and Hidden Affairs. Joan Crawford was ambition personified, glamorous, ruthless, and impossible to ignore. She crafted her image with surgical precision, transforming herself from a poor Texas girl into one of MGM's most bankable stars. But behind the dramatic gowns and icy stare was a woman whose personal life was filled with carefully managed secrets, especially when it came to love. Crawford had 4 husbands and countless affairs with men. That was the part the public saw. But what they didn't see were the private relationships with women that followed her throughout her career. Whispers linked her to Barbara Stanwyck, her co-star and close companion. There were also rumors of entanglements with actresses like Tallulah Bankhead and director Dorothy Arzner, figures within the queer elite of old Hollywood. One MGM staffer once said, "Joan knew how to protect herself. She gave the studios what they wanted and kept the rest locked behind closed doors. MGM certainly played its part. The studio micromanaged Crawford's life, dictating who she dated, what she wore, even what she said in interviews. Being caught in a same-sex romance during that time wouldn't just hurt her image. It could have ended her career entirely. And Crawford knew how to play the game. Her relationships with women were cloaked in coded language: companions, creative partners, special friends. She was rarely seen in public with these women, but insiders knew. Her drive to succeed often eclipsed her desire to live authentically. And though she made it to the top, she did so while hiding key parts of herself from the world. From someone who played the perfect Hollywood woman to someone who redefined what a woman in Hollywood could even be. Our next name is one of the boldest pioneers behind the camera. Katharine Hepburn, independent spirit, private heart. Katharine Hepburn is often remembered as the definition of strength. The woman who wore pants, spoke her mind, and made Hollywood bend to her will. She had 4 Oscars, decades of success, and a legendary romance with Spencer Tracy. But beneath that towering legacy was a private life more complicated and more quietly queer than most ever knew. Hepburn was deeply independent. She once said, "I put on pants and lived my life the way I wanted." But love? That was a battlefield she kept hidden. While her relationship with Spencer Tracy defined much of her public narrative, there were whispers, persistent and widespread, that the real love stories of her life were with women. One name stands out: Laura Harding. Harding was wealthy, discreet, and by Hepburn's side for nearly 25 years. They lived together, traveled together, and many believed they were romantically involved. Friends often referred to Harding as Hepburn's shadow, though neither woman ever confirmed the nature of their bond. Hepburn also had intense, emotional friendships with other women, costume designers, actresses, and producers. But like everything in her life, it was on her terms. She guarded her privacy like a fortress. In a rare moment of honesty, she once said, "I never wanted to play house, I wanted to play life." That quote, equal parts rebellion and revelation, may have been the closest she ever came to discussing her queerness publicly. And so, Hepburn remains a symbol of strength and mystery. She didn't need the world to understand her, just to respect her. From that controlled elegance, Itreni, we now turn to a woman who made history behind the camera and refused to hide in the shadows. Dorothy Arzner, Hollywood's first female director. An outlier, while the golden age of Hollywood was dominated by male directors, Dorothy Arzner broke through the ceiling. And then some. She directed over a dozen major studio films, mentored legends like Katharine Hepburn and Lucille Ball, and became the first woman to join the Directors Guild of America. But her contributions didn't end at cinema. Arzner was also one of the only openly lesbian figures in classic Hollywood. She lived boldly with her partner, choreographer Marion Morgan, for more than 40 years. They were rarely seen apart, attending industry events, parties, and social gatherings as a couple. And while the tabloids never dared say it outright, everyone in Hollywood knew. Arzner was respected, feared, and impossible to ignore. She created films that centered on strong, complex women, long before it was fashionable. Her movies like Dance, Girl, Dance, and Christopher Strong gave actresses roles with real depth, agency, and soul. Dorothy didn't just direct women, said one historian. She understood them, and she protected them. She created a quiet, safe space in an otherwise hostile world. Stars like Joan Crawford and Claudette Colbert felt comfortable working with her knowing they wouldn't be sexualized or reduced to stereotypes. And despite being the only woman in many rooms, Arzner never compromised. She dressed in suits, smoked cigarettes, and spoke her mind. She didn't ask permission, she simply created. As we move forward, we meet one of her rumored muses, a woman whose double life blurred fact and fiction beautifully. Claudette Colbert, the queen of double lives. Claudette Colbert dazzled audiences with her wit, elegance, and effortless timing. She won an Oscar for It Happened One Night and held the screen with commanding grace in Cleopatra. But while the cameras rolled, Colbert quietly led a life that kept even her closest friends guessing. She was married to a man, a Broadway producer, but they lived apart for most of their marriage. Rumors swirled that it was a cover, one arranged to keep her image safe while she enjoyed discreet relationships with women. Her close friendship with Verna Hull, a wealthy artist and socialite, raised eyebrows. The two spent decades vacationing together, hosting intimate dinners, and living in adjoining properties in Barbados. Industry insiders considered them a couple, though they never confirmed it. She was also closely tied to Dorothy Arzner, and some speculated that their collaboration on films like The Sign of the Cross was more than professional. Claudette understood the game, said one Hollywood publicist. She kept one face for the public and another for those who really knew her. Unlike some of her peers, Colbert didn't fight the system. She used it, bending perception to protect the truth. Next, we spotlight a woman who couldn't hide even when she tried, and who nearly lost everything when her truth was leaked to the world. Elizabeth Scott, film noir's enigmatic beauty. Elizabeth Scott had the smoky voice, the sharp cheekbones, and the smoldering screen presence that defined film noir. But unlike the dangerous women she played, she was the one targeted by the press, by rumor, and by a scandal that nearly ended her career. In the 1950s, Confidential magazine, the most feared tabloid of the time, ran a brutal exposé implying that Scott was a lesbian and a regular at private queer parties. For most stars, such an accusation could mean instant blacklisting. Scott denied the claims, but didn't retreat. She refused to marry for image, never publicly dated men to save face, and never gave the press the apology they expected. "I am who I am," she said in a rare interview. "I make no explanations." Despite the industry's cold shoulder, she continued working, even as studios distanced themselves. But the damage lingered. Her career never returned to its earlier heights. Still, her silence became a statement. She wouldn't lie, and she wouldn't sell out her truth for a movie deal. Scott's story is a reminder. Sometimes surviving is the most radical thing a queer person could do in old Hollywood. Mercedes D'Acosta, the lover behind so many legends. Mercedes D'Acosta wasn't a movie star, she was the woman behind them. A playwright, poet, and provocateur, she left a trail of broken hearts and burning letters all over Golden Age Hollywood. Few names pop up more frequently when tracing the secret lesbian lives of the era than hers. Why? Because Mercedes didn't just love stars, she changed them. Born into wealth and raised among the East Coast elite, Mercedes was bold, open, and way ahead of her time. She wore men's suits, smoked cigars, and wrote poetry so personal it shocked her own family. But her real influence wasn't just in her words, it was in her relationships. Her lovers included some of the most iconic women of the 20th century: Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, Isadora Duncan, Ava Le Gallienne, even rumors of an affair with Tallulah Bankhead. Mercedes wasn't quiet about any of it, and that's what made her dangerous. Her most complicated and enduring relationship was with Garbo. The two exchanged hundreds of letters, sometimes romantic, sometimes cold, always electric. At times, Mercedes begged for closeness. Other times, she was the one walking away. "I loved her," Mercedes once said, "but I was never sure if she loved me back." In 1960, she released her memoir, Here Lies the Heart, which hinted at her affairs without naming names. Hollywood exploded in denial. Friends turned their backs. Some called her a liar. Others called her brave. But Mercedes never apologized. She believed history deserved truth, even if it cost her everything. From the woman behind the camera to the one throwing lavish queer parties right in Hollywood's backyard, we now step into a world where secrets danced in silk and scandal wore pearls. Alla Nazimova, the Empress of Sunset Boulevard. Before there was Marilyn Monroe, before Joan Crawford, there was Alla Nazimova. An early Hollywood star turned producer, she was bold, exotic, and daring at a time when women weren't allowed to be. But Nazimova wasn't just a legend on screen, she was a legend off it too, and one of Hollywood's most unapologetically queer figures. Born in Russia, Nazimova brought European sensuality and depth to early American cinema. She became one of the highest-paid actresses in silent film, even producing her own movies, including the visually groundbreaking Salome, 1923. But her real power came not from the camera, but from what she built behind it, the famed Garden of Allah. The Garden of Allah was a sprawling Sunset Boulevard estate turned hotel that became the beating heart of Hollywood's hidden queer scene. It was where secret affairs were born, where same-sex love could exist, at least for a night, without fear. It was a haven in a hostile world. Nazimova herself had a long-term relationship with stage actress Eva Le Gallienne, among others. She often referred to herself and other queer women of the era as sewing circle members, a code phrase used to describe lesbian actresses without tipping off the press. She also mentored a young, closeted wave of actresses coming up through the ranks, offering them roles, protection, and space to breathe in a town built on repression. She gave people a place to be real, said one writer, even if it was only behind walls. Alla Nazimova's influence faded as the silent era ended, but her legacy endures in every queer artist who dares to live out loud. And next, we meet one of her circle members, a wisecracking comic who slipped under Hollywood's radar, but never lied about who she was. Patsy Kelly, the wisecracking lesbian. You almost missed. Patsy Kelly never looked like a leading lady. She was short, loud, and funny, always the sidekick, never the star. But in a town obsessed with appearances, Kelly pulled off something incredible. She lived as an openly lesbian actress in a time when most were buried in beard marriages and studio lies. In the 1930s and 40s, Kelly made a career out of playing the wisecracking friend, the comic relief, the brassy dame who stole scenes even when no one saw her coming. She co-starred in dozens of films, mostly B pictures, but her charm was impossible to ignore. Off-screen, she made little effort to hide who she was. She lived with women, talked about lady friends, and even admitted in later interviews that her relationships were with women. "I never pretended to be something I wasn't," she once said. "Why should I?" Her honesty made her both admired and exiled. By the late 1940s, work dried up. The studios weren't comfortable with her truth, and without the glamour of a Crawford or the mystery of a Garbo, she wasn't worth protecting. But she didn't disappear. In the 1960s, she made a comeback in theater and television, winning new fans with her unapologetic attitude and old-school comedy chops. She even played roles that parodied her own life, bold, bawdy, and unfiltered. Patsy Kelly may not have had the fame of others on this list, but she had something rarer: authenticity. She didn't just survive, she cracked jokes all the way through. Next, we meet a woman whose beauty dazzled and whose pain ran deep. A star who refused to play by the rules and paid the price. Kay Francis, the sad princess of Warner Brothers. Kay Francis was the queen of Warner Brothers in the early 1930s, sophisticated, magnetic, and heartbreakingly glamorous. Known for her emotional depth and dazzling wardrobe, she embodied class on screen. But behind that elegance was a woman navigating a world that demanded she hide every part of herself that truly mattered. Francis's personal life was complex. She was married multiple times, but none of those relationships lasted. Friends and colleagues often hinted at her preference for women, and she had long-term relationships that the studio worked hard to keep out of the papers. She was reportedly romantically involved with actresses like Marjorie Main and socialites outside the Hollywood spotlight. But her real love seemed to be her independence, something few women in her position were allowed to keep. As she aged, her refusal to conform, to be someone's wife, to settle into a traditional role, made her a liability. Her career declined sharply in the 1940s. Warner Brothers let her go, and she found herself on the outside looking in. She was too smart for the studio system, said one biographer, and too honest to play the game forever. Kay Francis died largely forgotten by the industry she once ruled. But her legacy lives on through the actresses who now get to live openly, something she never could. Now, we wrap up not with a person, but with a truth. How these women, in secret, in silence, and sometimes in scandal, changed Hollywood forever. Breaking the chains, how these women changed Hollywood forever. For decades, these women were forced to hide in plain sight, crafting perfect images for studio press junkets, while living lives full of coded glances, secret lovers, and the constant threat of exposure. But what they built in the shadows became the foundation for something bigger: change. By daring to love differently, even if only in private, these stars carved out a space where queerness could survive in a time that wanted it erased. Their stories weren't just about scandal or secrecy. They were about resistance, about endurance, about leaving the door slightly open so that future generations could walk through it a little more freely. Greta Garbo taught us that silence has power. Marlene Dietrich proved you can embrace androgyny and command a room. Dorothy Arzner showed that you don't have to be in front of the camera to change the industry. Mercedes de Acosta preserved truth through words, even when it cost her everything. And women like Patsy Kelly and Kay Francis refused to become someone else's version of acceptable. Hollywood didn't thank them. Not then. Many were blacklisted, forgotten, or rewritten. But today, their truth matters more than ever. Because in a world where LGBTQ+ people still face discrimination, these hidden lives offer both a mirror and a map. They didn't just survive old Hollywood, they helped dismantle it. Quietly, fiercely, one private act of defiance at a time. They hid their truth to protect their dreams and still changed Hollywood forever. If their stories moved you, please hit like, subscribe, and let us know which one left the biggest impact. These women weren't just stars. They were warriors in pearls. Thanks for watching, and keep their stories alive.